Welcome. I'd like to share with you a strategy for introducing students to the science and engineering practices that are a part of our new science standards in Alaska. This activity can be found online. It's free. It's an open source activity that is available at this URL. I'm going to demonstrate to you how I introduce it to students. My students are challenged to learn these science and engineering practices as one of our 3 dimensions in our new science standards. And so I'm going to start our ecology unit by introducing them to the idea of these practices and also connect it to the term STEM. I want them to think about what does that word STEM mean, not only from a science class perspective, but from their own cultural perspective. So we spend a little time setting the stage. I'm going to share with you the video that I recorded for my students to introduce them to this activity. In this project, we're going to explore what you think of when you hear the word STEM. Science, technology, engineering, and math are often combined in this term STEM. So as we're thinking about STEM, I want you to think about where you come from. What is your culture? Culture is a way of life. It's a pattern of behaviors shared by a group of people. Culture is dependent on those patterns and behaviors in the places where we live, learn, and work. And it can vary geographically from community to community. Culture varies across the globe, and it also varies in communities like Beaverton, Oregon, where these pictures come from. We're going to reflect on the communities and cultures in our own school and village. And we can make connections to our identity by looking at ourselves in the mirror, by who we live with or where we've traveled. We also make connections to our identity based on the music we listen to, the schools we go to, the movies we watch, the games we play, even the internet TikToks and Snapchats that we share amongst friends. They're all part of our identity, as well as the books and learning that we experience in schools. And so our identity is shaped by our culture and our society. It's developed from birth. It's shaped from our home values and our home communities. And we might use the analogy of an iceberg. There are parts of our identity that are very visible, just like the top part of the iceberg. Some cultural ways of life are easy to see, such as what language do we speak? What kind of clothing and food do we have? And what are some of the cultures at home? But some cultural ways, just like what's underneath this iceberg, underneath the surface of the water, are harder to see. And as we explore concepts in science, we might uncover some of those harder to see parts of our culture, such as the notion of friendship and leadership. It changes from community to community. We might approach decision making and problem solving differently. And our experiences with science, math, and technology are different. Our concepts of fairness and justice and roles within our family can be different. So let's think of both these obvious or easy to see sections of culture and these hidden parts of culture as we explore some of the complex ideas in ecology. Remember, we can see some of them we don't see. And we want to honor these different ways of knowing. There's different perspectives. And so Western science, which we're approaching ecology with, is one way, but there's also intuition, reasoning, experiences There's different ways of knowing, and what we're going to introduce to you with our ecology is a more Western aspect, but I'm going to be asking you to share some of your own personal ways of knowing as we study these topics. And so as we study these topics, let's ask ourselves this question: how do STEM and culture intersect? Science is a cultural understanding of the species that live in a local habitat and their potential for medicinal food and other human uses. How humans relate to and either sustain or deplete their natural resources is part of that. And also understanding how the body works, understanding seasons and stars. There's lots that's involved in science. And technology are the tools that we have. It can vary from things we cook with, things we sew with, computers, yes, but there are lots of different types of technology, and I'm going to challenge you to look for those. And engineering is kind of the design process. It's how we put these tools together and what we know to solve problems and be useful, but what else? What else can we think of? And of course, math. And remember, math is more than just numbers. We use those numbers to create models, graphs that help us to recognize patterns and quantities and make predictions. And so we're going to use all of these tools as we explore ecology in this course. And I'm going to give you an example of this from the Arctic, of course. This is an example from Inupiat Knowledge, and in the Arctic Report Card update for 2019, the Bering Sea elders write that the Bering Sea is undergoing changes that have never been observed in our lifetimes, but they were foreseen by elders decades ago. How did that happen? Well, indigenous people of the Arctic have detailed knowledge of sea ice, including an understanding of ice changes that extend past scientific sea ice records prior to the 1950s. Some of these records are stored as stories and songs. The oldest Inuit elders hold personal knowledge of sea ice trends and extreme events back to the early 1900s. In addition, they carry knowledge from community elders. This is information that Western science doesn't have, and so it's important to draw on different ways of knowing and knowledge from our elders. And also, indigenous communities use complex terms and explanations for ice structures, and these can confirm and challenge and augment or supplement Western science understanding. So remember that as we're going through these units, I'm going to ask you to have conversations with your family and draw in some of your community knowledge. So I'm going to ask you to look for examples of science and technology and engineering and math in your daily life. These are some examples from various cultures. An example of a technology or an engineering is yoga. Yoga is a system for healing the body and keeping the body healthy that was discovered over time and is very ancient. There are crafts, there are ways of cooking and creating things like cheese, right? Oh, cheese, pizza. And there is seasonal knowledge that helps us to subsist off the land. So think of all of these different types of science and technology and engineering and math as I'm asking you to put together your collage. And so I'm going to ask you to put together a collage with images that represent science, math, technology, and engineering from your life. And this is an example from Caitlin. And these are some things that she brought together that represent her life and some of the technologies, some of the science, some of the engineering that makes her world. So I'm going to ask you to make your own collage of images showing examples of your own STEM culture and paste it into this slide. So I'm going to give you a slide template and I'm going to ask you to do this. And as you think about the idea for your STEM culture collage, think about these essential questions. Who am I? What makes me who I am? And how do I use STEM knowledge and skills in my life, community, and/or environment? What stories can I share about my identity and how my culture uses STEM to solve problems and understand the world? Here is the template that I share with students, and you can get a copy of my lesson plan, the PowerPoint that I used in my video presentation, and the template. At the end, I'll share with you a link where you can get that information. And then I want to share with you a couple of examples of products that my students have created. So here you can see that I had a student who really spent some time finding technologies that meant a lot to him. I can tell he really likes music, and I particularly like the fact that he included a coffee pot. Here's another example of a student collage, and I think this is just really fun that she thought about things such as condensation on the window, dehumidifier, the wood stove. It's really fun to see the variety of things that students think of.